This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we call out rocker Neil Young because, well, he deserves to be called out. And we talk to the filmmaker behind The Comic Shop. It's a new film about a comic book illustrator who got detoured along the way and opened up his own comic book shop. That has its own complications, but it really is also about someone who just got sidelined along the way and was able to reconnect with their original passion. That's important. That's a great story to tell. We'll find out from the guy who told it.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
I don't like picking on classic rockers. For one thing, they made the soundtrack to our lives. Literally. They're also not getting any younger. I read a story just a couple days ago about how The Who's Roger Daltrey said he's going blind and deaf, and it just absolutely crushed me. So, I don't know, picking on the older rock generation just doesn't make sense to me. I try to stay away as much as possible. But then someone like Neil Young comes along, and I have to kind of shuttle my plans because he made me do it.
Guilty as charged.
You know, when you think about it, they should have a lot of wisdom to share. They've been around on this planet for decades. They've lived these colorful, remarkable lives. They may have loved and lost. They may have overcome lots of adversity over the years. I bet you they've got some great stories to tell and some great insights into the human condition. And then there's Neil Young. Yeah, he's an exception to the rule, and that's why I'm going to single him out on this episode because he richly deserves it. Now, Neil Young back in the 2000s was all about smiting President George W. Bush over the Iraq War. And we could agree or disagree. I think actually that particular argument has aged rather well. One of the things he did in that era was create a freedom of speech rock tour where he wanted to focus on the First Amendment. And I think at the time, part of the thinking in the pop culture landscape was that people weren't allowed to say what they wanted to say about the war, about President Bush. There was this sense that we were told you'd be unpatriotic if you said that.
I love this country.
Now, I think this is a bit of a straw man because a lot of people spoke out at the time. So, but at the same time, anyone who's free speech adjacent, anyone who wants to raise their fist for free speech, I'm all for them. So good for Neil Young for doing that at the time. Maybe it had some imperfections, but again, the free speech matters. The First Amendment is what we care about so deeply here on the show, and hopefully in this country, although sadly there are exceptions. But that whole free speech mantra really just got pushed aside in recent years by Neil Young. And of course, you may know what I'm talking about. A couple of years ago during the pandemic, Neil Young came out and said, that Joe Rogan, he's spreading disinformation, misinformation, maybe even malinformation. He must go. Spotify, if you don't kick him out, I'm going to drag my music off that platform. How dare you give him a voice? And Spotify said, well, we love you, Neil, but we're not firing Joe Rogan anytime soon. Joe Rogan survived. Neil Young eventually backpedaled. He put his music back on the platform. He didn't get many people to join or rally by his side, and he just looked foolish. Here is this free speech guy. Here is a guy who's dating back to the 1960s and 70s, a guy who's got hippie DNA to his core. And what he wanted to do was shut down one of the voices in the culture. And of course, that looked even worse in retrospect when the government and the media, well, they weren't exactly truth tellers when it came to the pandemic. So maybe Joe Rogan was wobbly at times, but he also got some stuff right. And we needed dissenting voices at the time. It's kind of what free speech is all about. And he seems to have forgotten that lesson.
Maybe you need a refresher course. Hey!
But more recently, Neil Young is back in the news because he wants to smite Donald Trump. Now, listen, the list of celebrities who want to attack President Trump is long. It's getting longer by the day, and there's nothing really novel about that. But what Neil Young said about Trump and what he fears Trump may do to him, well, that was novel. When I go to play music in Europe, if I talk about Donald J. Trump, I may be one of those returning to America who is barred or put in jail to sleep on a cement floor with an aluminum blanket. That is happening all the time now. No, it's not happening all the time now, and that's a lie. You know, I did research a case where a UK punk band had some trouble getting back into the country. And yes, they were critical of President Trump, but they said there was some sort of immigration issues or some other complications. It was their sheer conjecture that their anti-Trump status made them got them caught up in their kerfuffle that we're talking about here. So just conjecture, no facts, just a case where maybe something else went awry. You know, immigration can be complicated. Paperwork can get lost in the mail. There are reasons why these things happen. But to say, oh my gosh, because we were anti-Trump, we're being barred from the country. Until we know for sure that this is happening, well, I'll be the first one to speak out about it. That's just flat out wrong. But I don't think that's the case. It's certainly not happening all the time. And I don't think that President Trump or anyone from the administration gives a bleep about what Neil Young has to say on any given Thursday. I just don't. I think it's ego out of control. I think it's a rocker trying to get headlines, and sadly he's gotten some, and I'm paying into that particular situation, but it also has to be addressed. Now, part of the problem I have with Neil Young now is that not only did he betray his free speech efforts with that Joe Rogan attack, but where's he been? Where's Neil Young been in recent years? We really could have used him. We could have used a free speech warrior like Neil Young. Remember the Twitter files when people who had right-of-center views were being censored and taken down and shadow banned? That wasn't just a conspiracy theory. It happened. We've got the receipts. What about sensitivity readers? They've been taking away the words and sentences of beloved authors like Ian Fleming and Roald Dahl, Agatha Christie. That's happening.
You can't read that.
Neil Young didn't say a peep about it. What about President Biden and his administration? No, let's put aside Scary Poppins, that misinformation czar who's an absolute nightmare. But
Pondering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious.
But the Biden administration was really kind of pressuring big tech platforms to say, hey, this opinion doesn't work. This is wrong. We can't share this. We can't share that. That was happening too. Hey, Neil Young, where were you? Why weren't you fighting truth to power? Why weren't you the free speech warrior you're telling us you were? Well, you're not. You're a phony. You're a fraud. You're a partisan. You only care about free speech when you can weaponize free speech. The argument, not the actual free speech amendment. We needed people like Neil Young over the last few years. We needed Howard Stern in recent years. He's been missing in action as well. So I'm sorry, Neil Young, you've given us some great music. You might give us some more great music. But when it comes to free speech, you're doing it the wrong way. Be consistent or pipe down. And no one cares if you're critical of Donald Trump. No one cares at all, let alone the president. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't think about you. But you know what? If you rise up and defend free speech on a consistent basis, maybe you'll be cool again. Right now, you're anything but. As I may have said in the show before, I am a failed comic book artist. Just never got off the ground, never got off the launching pad, whatever metaphor you want to use. I went to school for quite some time to be an illustrator. I drew a lot as a kid. I remember, looking at Marvel comics and tracing them and copying them. It's what I wanted to be. It was my dream, and it didn't happen. I fell back on a plan B, which for me was writing, of course, podcasting and doing the things that I do now, this silly little career of mine. It worked out. It's fine. I have no regrets. But other people do have regrets about the dreams that just never happened for them. It's the story behind the movie The Comic Shop. And it's a new independent film. It's coming out April 11th on VOD platforms everywhere. And it looks at a character played by Jesse Metcalfe who, well, he wanted to be a comic book illustrator as well. It just didn't work out that way. He ended up owning a comic book store. And of course, that's where the story takes off from there. Now,
Mike, check this out. Wild Imagination Comics just opened up down the street.
I think we should go check out that other comic shop. See how the other half lives.
I'm Chad. My dad owns the company. We're hiring. You know anybody who's interested? The only comic store in town.
What about Mike's World?
Not much to see, though. Unless you're Mike.
Okay. Now, this is a independent film for sure. You can tell there's a modest budget here, but it's sweet, it's soulful. And it's the kind of story that I like being out there in the marketplace. We need more stories like The Comic Shop. It's why I invited the writer-director of the film, Jonathan Bowen, to share his story. How did he get it made? What were some of the obstacles along the way? What are the messages he wanted to share with the film? And how did he get an Oscar nominee to be a part of the film? That's another great story to share as well. So I hope you enjoy the conversation with Jonathan and find out about that actor who is what I call maybe the patron saint of indie filmmaking. We could use a few more of them too. Well, Jonathan, thanks for joining the show. And it seems very appropriate to ask the origin story of the comic shop, because that's all about comic books and superheroes and how the mighty are born. And also every indie film has its own sort of origin story that makes it unique and special. So give me the short version of how this whole concept came to be.
Yeah. So I used to go to comic shops a lot when I was younger, especially like through middle school. And I knew a guy named Mike who ran a comic shop and kind of seemed to lose interest over the years. Like we were really close, and then he just didn't show up as much when across the street. So there was some element of truth to that. And then as an adult, I kind of was thinking about this again and realizing that when I was a kid, I thought that running a comic shop would be like the coolest thing ever. And then I was running my own small business, realizing what a pain in the butt it is. And thinking like, I wonder if there was some of that. Like maybe this wasn't his passion. So then I kind of wanted to take this jumping off point of a real life Mike with my own experience, kind of as I got towards middle age, wanting to make movies, but being stuck doing corporate videos.
Yeah.
And I kind of married this, these two real things with like a heavy dose of fiction. And that was sort of the way the concept was born.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's helpful. I'll share a little bit about my own comic background in a minute, but it's sort of reaching for your dreams. It's being deferred. It's trying to be realistic about your life. And even though it has a very specific theme, I think it's very universal in its storytelling. Is that fair to say?
And that really was, a huge part of the purpose. So I'll just give you a little anecdote. But when we had Tristan Mays come on a Zoom call for the first time with Jesse, she admitted to us that she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't really know much about comics." Jesse interjected, this told me he really did understand the story well. He said, "It's not about comics." He's like, "The story is really about a guy chasing his dreams, or a guy who's lost his passion for life.
Yeah.
And he's got to find a way to reconnect." So it's really about the character relations. I think just the fact I haven't really read comics since I was about 13 should tell you that it's pretty universally relatable, because I'm not a huge comic buff at this time. I appreciate the medium. It had a big impact on me, but I've done a couple of these interviews with huge comic buffs, and it makes me so nervous because I'm like, I don't know all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine they would appreciate sort of the affinity you have for the material, and it's a love letter to the a unique art form which could be changing or evolving or even dying, just because so much of our life is digital. It made me kind of sad to see this whole analog world in a way, kind of giving it a big hug in a sense.
Right. That's true. And I know they have, I know there's been more digital comics lately, like they're distributing that way, but I do think that the kind of people who are, big comic book fans are very much physical medium fans, like, whether it's DVD, Blu-ray, or actual physical comics. There's something cool about holding that. I've written a couple books myself, and if they were just PDF files, I would have been so bummed. It was like, it was a huge part of the deal for me to like hold this thing in my hand that's got a thickness to it and know like I wrote this thing, versus like scrolling a PDF is just, as an author, is not as satisfying, even though as a reader, I actually love digital books.
Yeah, it's amazing. It may explain a little bit of why LPs, records are now kind of coming back in a way that, growing up having that tangible feel of it in your hand, look at the album cover, it's really hard to duplicate it, even if it's much easier in a million ways to have it on your smartphone. You're
right. That's true. Like records have made a pretty big comeback. Actually, I don't think it was last Christmas. It was the one before that. Like my dad's girlfriend gave him a record player. My dad's 82, so I guess he was about 80 then. And
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny because, here he is like messing with this thing again that, he, of course, he grew up with more stuff like that. But yeah, it was kind of neat because I haven't really messed with records a lot. So I think there is something to that, something you can touch and feel. That's not always, like you said, not always the most convenient depending on all circumstances. But there's like a neatness to it where maybe like if you're a comic reader, you'd be fine reading most stuff digital. But like your favorite comics, you want to actually own a copy to put somewhere and collect.
I just spoke a couple days ago with the producer behind the movie Reagan, and he has this incredible story about how the movie came to be, the funding that was there, then it disappeared. I mean, there's such a battle to make any movie these days.
It's
And
really
there may
hard.
be a million little battles with your film behind the scenes, making it happen. Is there one particular battle that you can share just to kind of let people know how hard it is to kind of push this boulder up a hill?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the hardest thing is really just the whole casting process.
Uh-huh.
Like the idea that when I did my first movie, I made what I thought was a good movie, and we got good feedback. We did well at the festivals, and we went to big people like whether it was Lionsgate or Showtime or whatever, and they all said, "Yeah, we like the movie, but there's no one in it, so like we don't know what to do with this."
Yeah.
And so they kind of all passed, and what I realized is like I'll make a different mistake, but I don't want to make the same mistake twice. I'm fine with making a new mistake and learning from that one. So when we got to this, I said to the producers, guys, we're not going ahead on this unless we can get some sort of name that at least does something. Like, yeah, we can't afford to get an A-lister, but we need to get somebody who the media would be interested in, somebody who can promote this thing a little bit. And then we were fortunate that the distributor kind of gave us a list of names that would move the needle for them. And, there's some on there that are quite surprising. Others I'm just like, I can't see that at all. I don't want that. But, so we make these offers, and it was a lot of waiting because the first one I think was Justin Long. And it's not a no that's bad. No is good because then you can move on to the next person. But it's a long no that is just frustrating because then your mind keeps building it up. Like, oh man, yeah, Justin Long, I should be so good in this. And then, it's like a week later and you're telling your wife, hey, let's go watch some of those old Justin Long movies again. Let's just tease ourselves. And so when he finally says no, like 6 weeks later, you're like, oh man, it's like a death almost. And then you have to kind of be reborn and think about the next person. So that was the hardest one where we had started casting in probably June, and then we didn't get Jesse until October, which is not necessarily unusual, but it definitely felt like forever. And like, is this thing ever going to happen? And then one of my producers kind of, to be honest, drove me a little bit insane because he takes every rejection as like, we have to go fix the script. And I told him, I was like, the script, there's nothing wrong with the script. They didn't even give you an idea of why they passed.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like the money wasn't enough, Justin Long, or timing wasn't right, or they just couldn't see themselves in the role. Like they just personally did not feel that connection to the material. So I think it worked out well in a way because Jesse did, he did feel that connection. Like he was excited to play this role. And that's good that we got somebody who didn't just, collect the paycheck, show up and kind of do the bare minimum. He showed up with a binder, like his script binder. He had notes on every single thing about how he related to the material or what he thought of it, what the scene was about. It was really cool, I thought.
A smaller part in the film is fascinating to me, and I actually got a chance to meet with this particular actor. It's Eric Roberts, who's got it's not a major role, but I've noticed in the last few years, he's almost become the patron saint of indie films where he just uses his clout and gravitas. He comes in, does a couple of scenes, knocks it out of the park, and then goes back and does another movie. And we talked about it, and I find him fascinating and such a unique career, and he still does big projects and he still does smaller projects. And I just, what was your, like working with him, and is that a fair assessment? I feel like he kind of is helping out indie filmmakers with just his presence in a way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I remember I think it was the casting director came to me and said something like, "Oh, would you like Eric Roberts in the movie?" And I just thought it was a funny question. It's like, well, like who wouldn't want Eric Roberts in the movie? Like, sure, I don't think we can afford that, can we? And then they said like, no, he's really affordable. Like, just trust me. Like, and then he actually did a video audition, if you can believe that. Like, he actually did the scene, and I'm like, you're an Oscar nominated actor. You don't need to read. Like, we know you're good. But I thought it was so cool. My jaw just like dropped watching this. I'm like, is this actually Eric Roberts reading my lines? Like, this is crazy. And so we were able to make it work out. And he's really funny. Though I will say that I didn't know his sense of humor. Like, he's such a good actor. So he comes on and he's like 3 hours early. And he starts me like, guys, I'm at like 15 minutes to film here. We got to get the show on the road. And I'm like looking at my first AD, like, is he serious? Like, he's not due for 3 hours. We have a whole other scene to do before then. And so I'm kind of freaking out. And my AD's like, relax. He does the same shtick on every movie. Like, he has certain things that he likes to do. Yeah. And because he knows there's indie filmmakers like me that are super nervous and we're like under the gun and it's a little funny to mess with. He messed with my wife the most because my wife's pretty short. And she was the behind the stills photographer. So like behind the scenes. And so he kept saying, well, somebody get her an apple box. Like, she needs an apple box. Like, and it was like, oh my gosh. And I just looked at my wife like, he's just joking. Like, don't take it personally or anything. But he was really fun. And I think you're right. I think that he just, looking at the way he interacts, I think he loves to be on set. I think this is what his passion is. It's like, it's neat for him to be the guy, and the crew, the cast and crew loved him. And he was just as nice to them. Like, everyone came up and, oh, can we get a picture? Like, after a scene was done. So we, of course, had a lot, like 10 minutes or so in the schedule for everybody to get their Eric Roberts photo. But he was happy to do it. And just a nice, gentlemanly, fun guy.
Gotcha. When you think about this movie, it works on a lot of different levels. There's a father and son subplot going on here. It's about, do you reach your dreams? When do you give up on your dreams? There's a lot happening here. When people do see the film, what do you want them to take away with? What's sort of you'd want this reaction above all else?
Yeah, what I really want is for people to just try to be in touch with what your passion is. It is not really supposed to be a like drop everything and follow your dreams. It's more of that, like, you can't just go through life just doing the basics and always be happy. I mean, of course, you have to have food, shelter, safety, and these things. But it's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, there's going to be something missing there, like some spirituality or some sense of like how you tap into the world around you. And it could be anything, right? It doesn't have to be, pursuing a career. It could be charity work. It could be volunteer work. But something that you've wanted to do that hasn't been part of your life, that like the days are blending together like Mike's. And he wakes up and he doesn't seem excited to do anything. He just wants to go drink. And so I think what he needed to find is that love again, that passion that it's been right there. We've seen, he goes and draws on his own sometimes. But now he's getting this writer or this drawer's block, basically. So that's what I would hope, is that people see the movie and kind of want to like reconnect with a passion from when they were younger, or rededicate themselves to a passion that they still have, but maybe haven't found as much energy or time for.
I think the company that's distributing the film is Quiver, and I've seen a lot of their films. It's good. They have good stuff. Yeah. Is it really tough to find a distributor for an indie film today? What's the landscape like?
Yeah, it is. And like that, I thought that process was kind of weird and depressing, because we actually were in touch with Quiver before we made the movie. They were the ones who gave us the list of the actors. Oh, wow. But that doesn't mean that, like, we didn't sign anything with them. They were just a Larry over at Quiver, great guy. He is just a friend of the producer. And so he was, willing and able to help us out and say, hey, I can lead you this direction. And then we kind of went to, I couldn't tell you who he was, some guy who was at Amazon Prime. Mm-hmm. And he like sat on the movie for months and then said like, oh, like, we're not interested. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then you get hit up by a bunch of kind of like fly-by-night distributors. So I was personally, honestly, really excited to sign with Quiver. Mm-hmm. I thought it was a good move because I've also seen a lot of their movies, and they have some stuff I really like. Even like Dead for a Dollar I love Christoph Waltz, and so they have a lot of like actor driven movies, and it's kind of all over the board. Like there's some really strange like off the wall quiver movies that I really liked. So I think that they're kind of a distributor I'm seeing is like giving a chance to a wide variety of movies. They do some that's just like your kind of I don't know, like action films that are maybe not the deepest things, but then they have other ones that are like really awardsy and like esoteric films. So it was a good home for the film, and it actually worked out kind of neat because as we started going through this process, I was going to ask anyways, but I hadn't got there yet. Larry asked, could we have the rights to your first movie, which hasn't been in circulation for a while? And so I was really excited. So we just signed the deal a couple weeks ago, and Quiver's also going to distribute my old first movie.
Oh, wow.
So that'd be kind of fun.
You mentioned sort of you really need a name to get this ball rolling. For other young filmmakers out there who are just starting or just even dreaming about doing what you're doing, what are some other little lessons you learned along the way that maybe people wouldn't expect, but are just part of the business?
I think a lot of it comes down to, this might sound obvious, but using all of the resources that you have, like who do you know or who do people know to get locations or to get something that might be a little more difficult. And also I would say like, you cannot, I know most people know this, but I don't know that everybody does. You cannot be a diva and think that like, well, I'm writing this thing and I'm directing it, like all these other things is not my job. This is no disrespect, but in every single project I've worked on, I've been involved in production design or props or things that were really important to me, especially in this movie, where they're like all these things are like key details. So I wanted to take point on all of those and have them like Technoman design myself, work with the artist myself, not delegate. And then of course, the biggest lesson I would say if you're going to do something is think backwards. Like you and I are talking right now. Who's going to be talking about your movie when it's done? Like you can say you have a great story, you love it. Who's it for? Everybody, because it's great. No. You have to identify like what kind of media sources or blogs or podcasts or anything might be interested in your film, and then go backwards from that. Because otherwise, you're going to have a movie you don't know how to promote, and that's the other hard lesson. You're going to have to promote it. You don't have a studio spending $100 million. So you're the guy. Like you can't just be Mr. Director. You're Mr. like publicist, promoter. You got to be your own biggest fan, and that means you better believe in what you're doing too.
Yeah. I imagine with every independent film, there are happy accidents on set. You don't have enough money for this, so you pivot and actually turns out better, or weather doesn't work out your way, and then you kind of have to improvise, and it actually ends up being a little bit of a perk to the film. Were there any moments like that in the production where you thought, boy, this wasn't the plan, but we did the best we could and actually ended up pretty well?
Yeah, you're right. There are always those. I'm trying to think, like, I think there was more on other projects I've done where I definitely thought it turned out better. One of them we just got lucky on though, which was like when Tristan's character is picking up Jesse from the jail. Well, we had a major camera issue after we got all of Jesse's coverage, and we turned around on Tristan and we got one single take. And then we had all these camera issues. It shut production down for like 2 hours on the first day. We got these kinks worked out, never happened again. But we were not able to go back. And thank God Tristan is so good and such a natural that she usually would nail takes in the first or second one. And so we were like replaying it, just all nervous, like, is this going to be good enough? And it was really good. And she, of course, she hated this idea. She's like, I wanted more time. And I promised her I'd try to get us back if we had any hole in the schedule. So we showed her the take and she looks at it and we're all like nervously watching her. And she said, okay, I was good. It was really funny because, actors are often very self-conscious, but I was like happy that she was happy for that. And you're right. There are always those little things where I think that they're smaller things, but sometimes like something doesn't really work out, maybe a piece of equipment even, and then you have to reimagine how you're going to shoot the scene. But then once you do it, you almost can't imagine it being another way.
Yeah.
Like they just like, oh, this worked.
I'm assuming you've have either thoughts or ideas, or maybe even something more concrete for a follow-up project. Is there anything you can share about that, or even just how you kind of move on from this, and like sort of the rocket fuel you get from a completed film, or the lessons you learned along the way? What's how do you kind of push forward after this?
Yeah, I think that that's the toughest one because like it might be my least favorite question that I always get asked, only because I'm like, I really hope there's another chance,
Yeah.
and I have to believe there will be, but this movie's got to kind of like buy me that next opportunity.
Yeah.
So yes, I do have a couple other finished scripts that I've thought of making. They're more, I think both those are kind of either thriller sci-fi or more sci-fi action,
Mhm.
but they're supposed to be like thoughtful movies. Like there's, there's a good message in them. And then there's a couple others that kind of have like just ideas. Like I really have this idea for a wellness retreat horror film, and it's like a wellness retreat gone wrong, where it's cult like, and they've almost come up with their own like little woo woo religion. And I don't know. I got this idea because my wife's big into all of this, like, health and wellness. And like, I just think it's something you could easily take too far.
Mhm.
And as somebody who's big into health and fitness myself, I want to see that. I want to see like somebody take this too far to where
Yeah.
it's like, hey, we can sacrifice like one person a month if it's for all of our good. I mean, like that's what we need. They'll be reborn anyways, or something like that. So there's some ideas floating around that I would love to have a chance to develop, and would look forward to. I've been with this project for 3 years,
Mhm.
just since starting it, but I wrote it 7 years ago. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to what's next as well.
One last question. Looking at the landscape, there are more opportunities for an indie filmmaker than ever before. I mean, so many different platforms. The technology, is going down as far as the cost. You can go on YouTube. There are so many different technological perks you have. At the same time, the industry is changing so dramatically. The landscape is so busy, so noisy. It's hard to cut through. Do you feel optimistic moving forward as a storyteller? Are you a little bit pessimistic, or is it dependent on what side of the pillow you wake up on? What's your thoughts as a filmmaker who wants to keep on telling stories?
Yeah, I think you really did nail it, because I've said that a bunch of times that like it's now easier than ever to make a movie. But I would argue it's harder than ever to get it actually seen, like to cut through the noise, as you say. There's so much out there. And so there is a democratization of filmmaking. I do think it depends on my mood. Like I think I've had times where I have this weird mood. I was totally serious about this. My wife still doesn't believe me, but I said like if I didn't get any way to make a third movie, I almost want to like set up this table in the garage and make like a stop motion movie. And she says like, well, I don't think you realize like that would probably take forever. I'm like, yeah, it probably would take like 7 years by myself working a lot. But I'm like, I'd still rather do that than never create anything ever again. So I try to look at the positive, is that there's a lot of, opportunity, as you said too. And you just have to find a way to get your work out there and kind of separate yourself, show that you know what you're doing, and you can make stories people relate to. So I try to remain optimistic, but in any artistic field, you have your dark moments where you're just like, oh, this is never going to work out. What am I going to do? What if it doesn't? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? That kind of thing.
Uh-huh. One last little tiny thing. When you have those dark moments, I'm not looking for like a deep personal. Are there little tricks you do to kind of lift you out? Maybe even a movie you watched or a song that kind of, picks your spirits back up?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes like I try to reframe things and think also like how far I've come. That at one point in high school, I couldn't even imagine how you would how you direct a movie. And then to kind of think like, well, I mean, worst case scenario, I've directed 2 movies. That's 2 more than most people.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I had this wonderful experience, something I'm proud of. And so I try to reframe it like that. Or I just kind of remind myself it's like, it's the creation I love. And maybe I won't be able to go make another feature, but I can go make short films, or I can write scripts. I can be involved in some way that doesn't cost a lot of money. Maybe it won't be quite as fulfilling, but I always try to remind myself that my attitude when I was younger was like, you got to be like the T-1000. Even if you get blown to bits, you're going to get back up and you're going to keep going. And you're not taking no for an answer until you don't have a pulse anymore, basically, you know?
Yeah. And you know what? The people who have that attitude are the ones who can say, I've made a movie, I've made 2 movies, I've 3 movies. And the people who don't have that attitude, and God bless them, everyone has their own path. They go into different endeavors. So there's nothing wrong with that. But you've got 2 movies. I suspect you've got more in the way. But Jonathan, thanks for joining the show. I really appreciate your time and your tenacity. I was a fledgling art major back in the day. I went to 3 different art schools, wanted to be a comic book artist. It did not pan out, but my plan B, I'm pretty happy with it. And I'm glad that you're kind of telling that kind of story because I think it is important. The movie is The Comic Shop. It's opening April 11th on video on demand platforms all over. It could be, Google, it could be Apple, it could be Amazon, wherever you're finding those kinds of films. Check it out, give it an order, give it a try. I think you'll like it. And we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your character actor of the week is Francis Conroy. Well, that's it for the show this week. Again, thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And if you have a chance, check out HollywoodInToto.com. We are now in its 11th year, celebrated 10-year anniversary last time around. Now, it's all about the right take on entertainment, much like this podcast. It is updated 7 days a week. News, reviews, commentary, interviews, everything about Hollywood that maybe you're not seeing in Variety or Deadline or The Hollywood Reporter, but you should. I do hope you check it out. But for now, I hope everyone has a wonderful week. That is doctor's orders.